I'm going to show you everything you need to know to capture incredible footage while vlogging with the Sony ZV-E1. I've been using the ZV-E1 for about 2 years now, vlogging. I've done some travel vlogging, I've done some hiking with it, I have made mistakes, and I've also had great triumphs. And I've learned a lot from those mistakes that have helped me really key in the best settings, process, everything while vlogging with this camera. So let's get into it. So before we get into the settings, I would like to briefly mention what lenses I recommend using while vlogging. If I was to pick one go-to lens that yields the best quality footage for vlogging with the focal lengths that are most commonly used for vlogging, I would go with the Sony FE4 20-70mm. That's what I currently have on here, and this lens is incredible. Initially, the F4 was something I was thinking I was not going to like because for years I've used the Sony 16-35mm G Master, and that one of course is an aperture of 2.8, which I really liked for that background blur, that bokeh. And in addition, I've used the Sigma 24-70mm 2.8 on my A7S III for a long time. But that 24 focal length on the low end was not the best for vlogging. Anytime I wanted to talk to the camera, it was too tight of a crop. There are a few times where I miss my 16mm focal length, but it's very rare. I have found the 20-70 to be really the sweet spot, and the affordability of this lens is very nice. It makes this vlogging combination very portable and light, which is really what you want when vlogging. So let's talk about the two tools that I recommend that you have for vlogging. The first tool you need to have an ND filter. Your footage is going to be blown out and unusable if you don't. I have used KNF concept filters with my Sony A-series cameras for more than 5 years now, and they're my very favorite filters. These have never let me down. And in addition, they are very nice build quality. So you have that nice metal and glass, actual glass. These do not feel cheap and flimsy. These feel really good in the hand, and the build quality shows. And the other thing is the adjusters on here. When you change this from ND2 all the way up to ND32, these don't go beyond the ND32 or the ND2, so they stop. When they go beyond, that's when with a lot of other filters you can get that X pattern across your footage, and there is nothing more sad than filming an epic adventure and then getting back and seeing that your footage is totally ruined because of your ND filter. And then the other tool that I recommend is something to mount your camera onto. So I like this selfie stick tripod combo from Ulanzi. I have used this for probably 3 years now. I've used it with action cameras, Sony cameras, pretty much any camera that this can support the weight of. And I just attach it right here to the top. And then anytime I want to put my camera stationary, if I'm filming a certain scene where it needs to be, all I have to do is just untuck these legs right here, and these legs go nice and wide, so it's very stable. And this does extend all the way up to, I believe, about 60 inches. I don't recommend extending it that far with a heavier camera like the ZV-E1 because it's going to get a little bit unstable. But if you have any shots where you're just gonna set it on something like a table or on the ground where you want a perspective, like showing somebody walking to or from the camera, this is perfect for that. And last I checked, I believe this costs like 20 bucks. So I'll link to this in the description below, along with the ND filters from KNF Concept. I'm gonna get this filter onto the ZV-E1 and we're gonna dive into those settings. All right, so right away, first thing we wanna do is we wanna go to the main menu. We're gonna click menu and we're gonna go up to the top here. So for this first section up here, where it says the main menu settings, I have just left these to the default. I have not changed anything there. And then for this one, for the main menu, these are all your key settings right here. So anytime you want to change something quick, you can click on those and you can easily change it right here, which is very cool. And then for your codec, you also have that here. You have your record setting, which is your bitrate. We'll get into that in a moment. You have your gamma display assist settings here, which we'll talk about that too. And then you also have your audio recording levels, your wind noise reduction, and your proxy recording. But this first one right here with the video camera symbol, This one is a really important one where this is going to have some of our core settings we need to change. And by the way, make sure you're in the video mode up here. You want to be in the middle one, which is the camera symbol. You don't want to be in the picture symbol or the S&Q mode. Make sure you're in the video mode. So for the image quality recording, go to the file format, and there are two settings you want to use here for vlogging. Either the XAVC HS 4K or the XAVC S 4K. So what's the difference? The top one is basically an H.265 container. It is more efficient, so you're going to get the same quality as the S, but it's going to be a little bit smaller file size. But only use the HS if you have a fairly new computer. So if you own a MacBook and it's an M series chip, that's at least an M1 Pro or newer, I recommend the HS. And if you're on a PC, if you have a fairly new NVIDIA RTX or AMD Radeon card that has the decoders for H.265, that is a good option. But if you're not sure, or if you have an older computer, then you want to do the HAVC-S. That is going to use the H.264 codec, and it's going to be much easier for your computer to decode that. So that is really where it makes a difference. It's going to be all about what you're going to be editing your footage on. And then for the movie settings right here, for the recording frame rate, you've got three options here. You've got 24p, 60p, or 120p. Now for a general vlog where you're not gonna wanna slow anything down, you just want it at the normal speed, I recommend 24p. But if you want to slow something down, I recommend 60p. You can always drop 60p on a 24 frames per second timeline, and it'll still show as 24, unless you interpret the 60 as 24, in which case you can do slow motion. I'll show you that in the editing later on. But if you want to have slow motion that's 20% of the original speed, in other words, 5 times slower, you could do the 4K 120 here, but I don't recommend using 120p most of the time. I recommend the 24p. 120p is going to definitely heat up your camera, and if you're filming long duration clips in that, your camera may overheat and turn off on you. So 24p is my go-to right here. And then for the record setting, you want to do the 100M 422 10-bit. This is going to get you the most colors and the best looking footage out of that camera. And with that highest bit rate, you're going to have the most detail in your footage as well. And then for the S&Q settings, this is basically your slow motion mode on here. And then here, you can adjust this and it's going to show you what your slow motion is going to look like for this. And then for the record setting, keep it set to the same here for that. You want those to mix well if you're doing slow-mo. And then for your time-lapse settings right here, what I recommend is I recommend 24p. And for the interval time, it really depends on how long you want that to be later on. If you do a 5-second interval, you've got to film for 10 minutes to get a 5-second time lapse. So generally I do shorter time lapses for my footage, so I keep it at 1 second. But if you're doing something where you really want to show the advancement of time over a long duration, then put that interval up to 5 seconds. And for the record setting, you want to do the 100M 422 10-bit for the time lapse as well. For the log shooting setting, I keep this off here. Now, you could use this to film your S-LOG3 if you wanted to do that. And the way you would do that here is you would do on flexible ISO, and then you would set it to sgamut3.cine/S-LOG3 here. However, the reason I do not do this here, I will show you later on, we can do the same thing in a picture profile. And after we select the S-LOG3 in the picture profile, there's one setting we have to change to make it align with this right here. But that has advantages because you can do a gamut display. And then proxy settings, I keep that off. I do not use proxies. And then if we keep scrolling down beyond that grayed out setting, we get to the lens compensation. So for these, I keep these at auto for the top two. And then this one, of course, is grayed out. Depending on what lens you're using, it may or may not be grayed out. But for the breathing compensation, make sure that's turned on. It's going to help your focus look nice and smooth, and it's not going to jump. So if we go back here to the next settings for media, for format, first time you put an SD card in, make sure to format it. And by the way, in case you're wondering what SD card I use with this camera, I'm going to pull it out here and show you. I use the Sony TUF 128 gigabyte, and it's the V90 card. So that gives me 300 megabytes per second of read speed and 299 megabytes per second of write speed. Now, these tough cards are hard to find now. Sony has stopped making them. You can still buy them some places, but if you don't already own one, I highly recommend picking one up. They are the best, especially for vlogging. They're basically waterproof and almost indestructible. So I highly recommend getting one of those if you don't already have one. But don't worry, if you don't, I also recommend the SanDisk ones that have that V90 rating as well. That's going to ensure you can film the 120p footage on here anytime you want to. Your card's going to be able to keep up with it. And then for the files here, I don't mess with any of these settings. I keep the file settings to their defaults, but if you want to change them, that's where you would change them. And then for the shooting mode, this is a very useful setting, and let me show you why. So here is where you can save all of your settings when you get them keyed in for one of the modes. And you can have different modes on here that you can toggle between. So you can save a whole bunch of different settings to the memory. So right here under shoot mode is where you would go to select those settings. And right here, if you see me toggle between 1 and 2, you don't initially see much change except for two values here. 1 has an ISO value of 100 and 2 has an ISO value of 640. In addition, 2 has picture profile 1 and 1 has picture profile 11. So I'm going to show you where those settings came from when we get down into those, but basically that is the S-Cinetone mode that I have all configured on here and the S-LOG3 mode. So either one of those that I want to use for my filming scenario, all I have to do is just go to shoot mode right here under number 4 under the video, and I can select my mode right here between the two, and that's all I have to do. I don't have to go mess around with all of these settings and try to figure them all out when I'm out in the field. And I will show you how to save those once we've set up all of our settings. For these settings right here, I just keep these at their default. I don't change any of them. Now for the audio recording, if you really want really good audio from this, I don't recommend using the built-in mics. The mic that I recommend is one that you can hot shoe mount on here, and it is this Sony ECM-M1. So the way you can mount it is you can attach it right up here, and it's going to click into place, and then you tighten it. So the advantages of this mic is you have 8 different settings here that you can adjust that are super useful for vlogging. So the default one that I usually keep it set on is this one right here. And what this means is the pattern is optimized to pick up audio in a V shape going outward from the back, as well as a V shape going outward from the front. So as long as you're not standing to the side of the camera, you're going to get a really good pickup on it. But the nice thing about this mic is you can record 4 different channels with it. And one of those is a safety channel. So you're not gonna have to worry about any blown out audio. That safety channel has a lower gain on it. And then the other one is it records audio in a 360 pattern around here. So if you have certain clips where that 360 pattern would be better, but you don't wanna set it to that all the time, which by the way, the 360 pattern is right here, that fully white dot, that's going to record the 360 audio. But if you don't wanna have it set to that all the time and you wanna have one of these other settings, then you have that extra track that's recorded automatically, regardless of what this is set at. So that is super useful. Audio recording, keep that on. And then the other setting you want to change down here is you want to have the microphone directivity set to auto. And whether you're using the mic on the camera or this mic, I recommend keeping all of these checked. And then for the M-Shoe audio set, this is available because I have the ECM-M1 connected, but you want to make sure you select 4 channels if you're using that one. Now, when you go to edit later on, you can mute the channels that you don't go with. But I recommend having those 4 channels there if audio is really important to you, because you're going to always have a channel that you can work with for high quality audio. And I want to show you really quick how this displays here. You can see the 4 channels right here, and you can see them listening to me. And 4 is the safety channel right there. You can see how 4 is a much lower level for the audio. And then I believe 3 is the 360 channel. So going back to our menu here, going down to the next one, the TCUB, I don't mess with these at all. These are time code. These are going to apply if you're using multiple cameras that you need to sync later on. When we're vlogging, we're probably not doing that. Image stabilization, this is an important one. The ZV-E1 does have some very vlogging-friendly settings, including active and dynamic active. But when you use those settings, you introduce a crop. And let me show you. Let me go back to the main screen here. So if we go here and change those settings, which by the way, I clicked the function button right here. But here is where we have the default of steady shot. So if I go off and steady shot, there is no difference in crop. It is the same crop. And by the way, if you've been wondering what this red is on my screen here, this is the focus peaking setting, which helps you see where your camera is focused. If you don't want that on, you don't have to have that on. I have it on, but I'll show you where to put it on in a moment. But if we go up here to active, you can see a crop takes place there. So standard all the way up to dynamic active is a massive crop. So the reason I recommend using standard for that is later on, there is a tool named Gyroflow, and it's absolutely free. I'm gonna show you how to use it. You can integrate it with a lot of video editing software directly, but that's going to allow you to stabilize that footage and it's going to look really nice, but there is one setting you have to change so that you don't have any issues with that. And I'm gonna show you that in a moment. But then the steady shot adjustment, just make sure that's set to auto as well. And then framing stabilizer, I keep that off. And then zoom, you do have the ability to use clear image zoom on here, which is very cool, honestly. So let's key in these settings and then I'll show you. So if you want to set it to clear image zoom, select that there. I do recommend that. And then have everything from 1 to 2 selected. I don't recommend the ×4 though, because that gets into less good looking zoom. So I recommend just doing 1 to 2. And then the zoom lever speed, for the standby, I like to have this set at 3. That means when you're not recording. Then when you are recording, I like this set at 1. I like that really slow zoom when recording. It looks much more professional. And then I just keep those at the default, and I keep that at the default. I don't change any of those. So the zoom is right up here on the top. It's technically on the same button as your on-off button. And what you can do is you can zoom like this right here, and you're gonna see the W to the T. When it gets to the T, that means it's at 2x. So that is in the 20 millimeters, but let's say you set this lens all the way to 70, and then you do the zoom on that as well. That gives you a whole bunch more reach with this. So to be clear, that is 70 with it zoomed in all the way. We can go all the way back to 20, and then we can zoom out in 20. So you have a whole bunch of flexibility with that clear image zoom, which is really good, especially with travel vlogging, or if you want to really focus on something in the distance, that's going to be a very useful tool there. And then for the shooting display, I like to have the grid lines on, and I like to do the rule of thirds. That really helps me with framing my subjects. And then for the marker display, I leave all of this alone to off. For shooting options, I leave all of these at their defaults. Now, going down to the exposure settings, there are a couple really important settings here. So under exposure, if we go over here, for the ISO, I set this at ISO 640. And the reason for that is base ISO, when you're using S-LOG3, is 640. You don't want to use any of these that have lines on them. That means you're going to be missing out on dynamic range, and you're going to potentially be introducing a lot of grain and noise into your shadows. So we'll talk a bit more about the recommended ISOs later on, but for the ISO range limit, just keep it at its defaults. We'll talk about the differences between S-Cinetone and S-LOG3. And then for the exposure compensation, I keep all of this as it is. I'm going to talk about that as well later on. And metering mode is really important. This is basically how you're getting an exposure readout in your video footage. So by default, I keep this at multi. But you could do center, spot standard, entire screen average, highlight, etc. There are use cases for those, but for general vlogging, multi is really what you want to use. And face priority and multi-mode, keep that set to on. And then spot metering point, put that at focus point link. If you do center, it's just going to take from the center of your frame, but I prefer that exposure be measured wherever the focus point is, because chances are that is the focus of your scene. And for the white balance, right here, you want to set this to a manual value. It's going to make your footage much easier to grade and edit later on if you're doing grading. So I like to set this to a manual value of 5600K if I'm filming during the day. And if I'm filming at nighttime, I like to do 3800K. And then if I'm filming at sunrise or sunset, I like to do 6500K. So this is mostly going to apply if you're using S-LOG3. If you are using S-Cinetone, I would recommend keeping this set to auto. Auto white balance is going to do well in S-Cinetone. And that is all the way up here at the top. Make sure not to select the auto white balance for underwater. Don't select the one with the fish. That is not going to do well for you. And then for the priority set and white balance, just keep that set as standard. And shockless white balance, keep that at 1 fast. And then for the color tone, this is where we can get into our picture profiles. So what I would like to do is I would like to set up the 2 picture profiles here and show you how to do that. So on some of the other Sony cameras, S-LOG3 is picture profile 8, but you'll notice on here there's no 7, no 8, and no 9. So what you want to do here is you want to pick picture profile 1, you want to toggle to the right, and under gamma, you want to set this to S-LOG3. And then under color mode, you want to set this to S-Gamut 3. And then there's only one other setting that I recommend changing here, and that's going down here to the bottom to detail. And for the level, I recommend setting it all the way to -7. -7 down here is going to give you footage that has the least level of sharpness to it. If you don't change it to that, you're going to have sharpness baked into your S-LOG3 footage. If you're going to edit it, you can always add some sharpness later on, and it's going to look much better. But that is all you have to do to set your S-LOG3 mode. But if you would like to do the S-Cinetone mode, you want to go down here to picture profile 11, and by default, it should already be at gamma. If it's not, change it to that. And then the color mode, same thing, change it to that as well there. And then for the detail, I typically keep S-Cinetone right about -5. That is my preference for that, because if you're using S-Cinetone, the intent with that is you're going to have that cinematic look straight out of camera, and you're probably not going to want to grade it later on, hence why you're filming in S-Cinetone. And soft skin effect down here, keep that off. I do not recommend the soft skin effect out of camera. It's going to do a lot of weird things with your footage, and it's not going to look good. All right, so for the zebra display, we want to have this on. And the reason for that is we want to make sure we are not overexposing our footage. But what you set this to is going to depend on which mode you're using. For the S-LOG3 mode, you want to go down here and you want to set this to custom 2, and you want to set it to 94 plus for the lower limit. That's going to help ensure that you overexpose your footage in S-LOG3 like you want to. I'll explain why. But you also don't want to blow it out so you can't recover it later. And 94 plus is the perfect balance of that for exposing it. But in the S-Cinetone mode, we want to expose this a little bit differently. For our zebras there, we want to do the lower limit of 100 plus. That is going to help us ensure we don't blow out the S-Cinetone. But we, of course, will be able to save all of these zebra settings with those 2 shooting modes as well. So none of this you're going to have to change once you've initially set it for those modes. And going down here to the AF/MF, for focus mode, I recommend continuous autofocus when doing vlogging. And for the autofocus transition speed, I just keep it right there in the middle. I like that middle. That has served me well. Subject shift sensitivity, I keep it right there at 5 as well. And the AF assist, I keep that off. For the focus area, I keep wide set. And then for the focus area limit, I have no limits. I have it the first option right here. And then for the focus area color, I just have the white. The circle of focus point does not circulate, and the AF frame move amount standard. Subject recognition, I have that turned on, and then my recognition target I have set to human by default. That is obviously what I'm going to want in most cases. And then you can actually put different targets on here. So I just keep all of these checked by default, but there is quite a bit you can do there. And for the right left eye select, I just keep that auto. Auto has worked well for that. And then down here, if you want to add a face memory, you can do that. So you could add yourself if you had other key people that you want it to pick up on. This is useful if you're around a lot of people, and it does do a good job with that. I don't currently have any programmed in, but I have played around a little bit with it over the years, and it has done well. And then if you do that, you just want to make sure registered face priority is turned on as well. Focus assistant. So for these settings, I keep the focus map off, I keep the focus magnifier to the defaults, and I keep this to no limit and 1x. But the peaking display, that is what I have turned on, and that is all of that red you see. So turn this on right here, and then the peaking level, I typically keep this set to mid or high. It really depends on my scene. Right now it is high, and that is a lot of red on there. If that's too much red for you and you want it more subtle, you can put this to medium and you can see much more subtle. But if you put it to low, it's basically almost the same as having it off. So I don't recommend low really for that. I do recommend at least mid if you're gonna have it on. And then the peaking color you can choose. You don't have to do red. You can do yellow, blue, or white. The reason I have it set to red though is red is a color that's least likely to occur in the environments I'm filming in while vlogging, especially when I'm doing a lot of hiking. There's a lot of yellows, blues, and whites when hiking, but there's not a lot of red. So I keep it set at red. I find that's easiest for me to see. And then going down here to playback, none of this really needs to be changed. This just relates to playing back your footage. So I have not changed any of those settings. And then down here, this is a bunch of connection type stuff. So I don't have any of this that I've messed with. But I will say down here, there are a couple things you might want to change. One of those is the custom buttons. So you can change a bunch of stuff with this, and it's gonna tell you how to set it here. So it's going to show you the buttons here, and it's going to point out which button you're changing. So if you want to change those for your preferences, go ahead and do that. And again, the dials, you can customize those as well. You can turn on touch operation or turn it off, so that enables you to change settings on the screen here. So I can touch ISO down here and I can actually change my ISO. But also for ISO, I can just change it here with the ISO button. The button is still my preference. And then on the shooting screen, there's a bunch of things here you can change as well. What your different swipes do and different touch functions. I have kept all of those at their defaults as well. And then for the monitor brightness, I have changed that to +2. I have found that +2 is the perfect amount of brightness for me. And then display quality, I keep that at standard. I don't need the high quality on there. Standard has worked just fine for me. And then vertical display, I have that on. And then monitor flip direction, I have that set to auto. And then for display options, if you want to have that gamma assist in S-LOG3, you can turn it on right here. And that's going to help you see an approximation of what the footage will look like later on. I personally use it some of the time in S-LOG3 and other times I don't. But it is a very useful tool. For the power options, I have this set to the power saver off at 1 minute, but then the auto power off temperature, I set this to high. So what I talked about earlier is having it on high can be the difference between it turning off when it gets warm and not turning off until it gets very warm. So I like to have it set to high. I have had it power off a few times on me when I'm filming in like bright sunlight and I'm standing and talking to the camera and it's like 100 degrees out. I've had it overheat a few times and turn off. It does save the file that you're recording. I've not ever lost files that way. But high has definitely gotten me a lot more record time than standard has. And then the rest of these settings are pretty much not going to apply here to anything we need to set. But I do like to have the record lamp on under this final one, under setup options. I like to have that on. And sensor cleaning, if you ever need to clean your sensor, you'll do that there. Pixel mapping, you can do that manually as well. The version here, this is good to check if you want to see if you're on the latest firmware or not. I am on the latest firmware for the body here. And my lens, I'm not sure if I'm on the latest firmware. So let's talk about exposing properly for S-Cinetone and S-LOG3 really quick here. And specifically, what I want to demonstrate is the zebras here. You want to use a combination of our EV value down here, but we also want to utilize our zebras. So currently, that entire scene using the mode is overexposed by about +0.3. But if you look closely, what's actually overexposed is the sky up here. So in this case, if you value that sky not being blown out, you would want to turn your ND filter to a little bit darker. So you'd want to turn it toward ND32 until those zebras disappear. So now we can see the sky up there, but if you look, the rest of our scene is underexposed by about -2. Everything is really dark here. And in general, unless the sky is really your focus of the scene while vlogging, you want to put this back and you want to go to about the 0.0. So you'll notice not all of our sky is overexposed now at 0.0. Some of it is, but not all. So that is what I would do right here. That 0.0 is going to nicely expose your foreground. And I'll film a sample shot here in S-Cinetone so you can see what it looks like. But that's going to be the best balance. A little bit of blown out highlights here in the sky is not really a big deal for this particular scene, again, unless the sky is your item of focus there. And then in addition, you also should use your histogram down here. So with the histogram, you can see nothing is clipping right now. We don't have shadows clipping. And if something is clipping, it's just a very tiny bit of highlights here. But you can see how the histogram changes when I change that. So when I do that, our image shifts way down dark and our shadows are definitely clipping right there. It's off the top. But even if we get to that, nothing is technically clipping, but you're gonna have quite a bit of noise in your shadows if you try to bring them up when editing later on. So we really wanna get our image kind of near the center there in our histograms. And that is about where we do it right there. But let's go to S-LOG3 and talk about that. So I'm gonna go up here to our menu and I'm going to switch to S-LOG3 mode. So S-LOG3, like I mentioned, we want to overexpose by about +1.7. And in this case, we get the blinking +2.0, and we do have some zebras there. So we would want to turn our ND filter a little bit toward ND32. And right about there gets us our +1.7. So this is a properly exposed S-LOG3. This is what it looks like before we grade the footage, and then this is what it looks like after. And you'll notice on our histograms here, everything is nicely centered. We don't have too far to one end or the other. Now, if we put this brighter, you can see we get the blinking +2, and we are definitely shifting toward the brighter end of things. Our image is going to be very bright. But then if we put this too dark, we're way down here to the lower end of things. Technically, our shadows are not clipping on the histogram, but there's no need to film that dark of an image. If we want clean shadows are going to be right about around +1.3 to 1.7. And so what we want to do is we want to change one other setting here before we save our preset, and that is the shutter speed. What you need to know is if you were vlogging with a shutter speed of 1/50, there is a chance that later on when you go to stabilize that footage with Gyroflow, you're going to get jitter and ghosting in your footage at those shutter speeds. So what I recommend doing is I recommend going up to a shutter speed of at least 1/100. This is with shutter speed of 1/100. So seeing if this makes a difference after stabilizing with Gyroflow, or if we still have some jitter and ghosting in our footage. And if you're gonna have a lot of motion in your footage, then you want to do a shutter speed of 1/200. And this is shutter speed of 1/200. So let's see how this looks. But the thing to note is when you change the shutter speed, it's going to affect your exposure on here. So in this case, when I go to 1/100, we're at a 0.0 exposure, but we don't want that in S-LOG3. We want to actually be overexposed. So at this point, with this particular lens, we can't reduce the aperture further. We're at f4.0. So what we would do though is we would raise the ISO. So S-LOG3 has dual native ISO. The first is at ISO 640. So that's going to be your general use daytime one. But if you were in low light or filming at nighttime, you can go all the way up to ISO 12,800 and get clean footage. Now, obviously right now that is super overexposed in the daytime. But let's say I was at 1/200 for my shutter speed. That 2 is still flashing, so that's not good. We're overexposed. So we don't need the ISO 12,800 right now. But if we needed to make an ISO adjustment for the shutter speed of 1/100, in our current lighting, we can go to about ISO 2000, and that's gonna put us at 1.7. And I will say ISO 2000 on here, I'll record a sample here for you. It is still quite clean. You don't have a lot of noise at that. But if you have to get much higher than about ISO 4000, I recommend just adjusting your parameters so you can use that 12,800 to get a very clean, noise-free image. And of course, for my defaults, I recommend ISO 640 for daytime. So once you've keyed all of those in, we're going to go and save our preset. And the one thing we want to make sure of really quick is we want to go back to our zebras. And since this is for S-LOG3, we want to make sure the lower limit is set to 94 plus. It is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our menu, and we're going to go up here, and we're going to go to the video symbol right here, and we're going to go to shooting mode. And we're going to go to camera set memory. We're going to toggle right, and we are going to save all of these settings to picture profile 2. Picture profile 2 is my S-LOG3 on here, because if I don't want to do that grading later on, S-Cinetone is going to be my default. And I'm going to show you how to set that in a moment. But right here, we are going to save everything as option 2, and it's going to say registered. So now when we want to get to that mode, we're just going to go to shoot mode, and we're going to select 2 right here. Now, if you go back to 1, you can see this is my S-Cinetone mode. So for number 1 to key it in, we're going to go back to our zebra display, and we're going to make sure our zebra level is set to the 100 plus. It is set to the 100 plus, so we're good there. And then finally, we're going to go down here and we're going to set that shutter speed. So if you're going to be moving a lot, set it to the 1/200. If you're not going to be moving a lot, the 1/100 is going to serve you well. Obviously, this, again, is underexposed right now. And ISO, make sure ISO is at 100 for S-Cinetone. You'll see there's no lines with our ISOs here. That means ISO 100 for S-Cinetone is the native best ISO to use. It's going to really give you the cleanest image, but you do have flexibility. If you need to go up to about as high as ISO 800 in S-Cinetone, you're still going to be fine with that. So I recommend 100 to 800 there. So once we've keyed in that setting, we're going to go up here and we're going to save it. Go to the video, go to shooting mode, go to camera set memory, and we're going to save it as number 1 right here. So it's going to say registered. So now if we go to our shooting modes and we toggle between them, you're going to see the 2 differences is ISO 100 right here and picture profile 11 right here. And then number 2 for the S-LOG3 is ISO 640 and picture profile 1. So if you decide to vlog in S-LOG3 some of the time like I do, you're going to want to know how to do a basic grade on that footage. And then I'm also going to show you how to do Gyroflow stabilization. So this first clip here, this was filmed in S-LOG3, and this is before grading the footage. So I'm going to use Premiere Pro. If you don't have Premiere Pro, if you're using DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, a lot of these basic settings are going to be the same, but you're going to have to do them in slightly different ways in that software. But whatever software you're editing in, make sure you have your waveforms up. Waveforms are right here. These are going to be one of the absolute keys to getting the proper grade and not overexposing or underexposing the highlights and the shadows respectively. So the first step is we're going to apply our S-LOG3 to Rec 709 conversion LUT. So in Premiere Pro, you want to make sure to do this under Creative and not Basic Correction. You want to have it down at this level, because when we make some changes in basic correction, it's going to be above the LUT, and that's going to be important. So under Look, we're going to go to Browse, and in this case, I'm going to select the default conversion LUT from Sony right there. So that has been applied. And then at this point, we have a little bit of room to bring down the shadows. We can do that under basic correction. We can drag shadows down here. It's going to give us a bit more contrast in our scene. And we technically have room on our waveform to bring up our highlights a little bit if we want to. But in this particular scene, I'm going to choose to bring down my highlights a little because I want the sky to pop more. And then shadows, I'm going to keep those down just a little bit. I like them right there. And you can see in our waveform, the shadows, nothing's going below 0, so we don't have any shadow clipping. And then with our highlights, nothing's going above 100, so we don't have any highlight clipping. Now this particular scene, when I filmed it on a hike about a year ago, this one I did not overexpose by the 1.7, but if I had, I'm gonna go back here and show you adding that LUT. I'm gonna reset everything up here. If I had overexposed by 1.7, I would add the Sony S-LOG3 EV -1.7 LUT. And basically, this is the Sony LUT that I have just adjusted the exposure value on it to make it a little bit easier starting point. So it's basically a preset that I've saved. So if we open that, our image is going to look much darker than it did with the default conversion LUT. So technically, we could still use this. We would just have to bring up the starting exposure a little bit to about right there. And then we can bring up the highlights a little bit here if we want to. But I don't want those clouds to look like they're blown out, so I'm gonna bring them up to about there. And then we could bring the shadows down a little if we want to as well. So if we drag through this clip, we just wanna run through it and make sure nothing is overexposing or underexposing with the clip. And this, of course, is before I stabilized it. This is all entirely handheld. And I'm going to show you Gyroflow here because this is relevant to this particular situation. So remember, the conversion LUT is a starting point. It's not going to complete the grade for you. So now that we've graded this clip, I want to show you a before and after. So this is just my handheld with that standard stabilization out of the ZV-E1. Obviously, it's very shaky. I wasn't even trying to hold it too still right here. I was doing some panning and looking around while I explained some different landmarks in this clip. But that's before the Gyroflow. And I'm going to apply the after. And so you can load the Gyroflow website and you're going to click download Gyroflow. And then when you go to download it, it's going to usually detect your OS automatically. In this case, I'm on a Mac. So you just want to click install Gyroflow. And you can use Gyroflow standalone, but the reason I don't recommend that is because you have to put each and every clip through Gyroflow, export it, and then import it into your video editor. But in the case of Premiere Pro, Gyroflow also works as a plugin. So Gyroflow is right here, and all you have to do is just drop it on your clip, and it's going to do its magic automatically. But if you want to change anything further, just go to your effects, and you can go down here, you can adjust smoothness, zoom limit, lens correction, horizon lock, horizon roll. There's a whole bunch of settings you can customize. Usually the default with the ZV-E1 is great. It'll detect things really well. And you can see after I add it here, super smooth. And when I'm holding the camera relatively still, the footage looks good. This is that 1/50 shutter speed. But as you can see, when I start to move it, you can see we get that ghosting and jitter. And that is why I recommend the shutter speed of 1/200 when I gave the demonstration earlier in this video. It's going to serve you much better. Now this one's not that terrible because I wasn't walking with it, so the jitter and ghosting is almost within the realm of acceptable. There are some other clips on this hike where I was walking with it and things were very shaky. But you can see, like when I pan here, you can see some of that jitter and ghosting back here. But all in all, the clip wasn't completely ruined. And this would be another clip, by the way. And the reason I included this one is I wanted to show you, if you go to our scopes, this one is going to be a little bit trickier to grade, so I wanted to show you that as well. So if we go here, I'm going to apply my EV -1.7 to this clip to start with, just because it was so overexposed. And what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit, but then I'm going to bring up the shadows. And the nice thing is, because it was overexposed, we're going to have clean shadows. We don't have to worry about those at all. But when I bring up those shadows, I'm missing some of the contrast in the scene. There's really not a lot of contrast. So what we can do in this case is we can drag the blacks down a little bit, and we can add some of that contrast back in that manner. But you have to be careful because, like over here, you can see it's starting to hit 0, which represents this part of the frame. So that means it's completely black and we're losing detail. So we want to bring it back up a little bit to about right there. That looks good there. But we could bring down the whites a little bit because there is a lot of white in this scene. So if we bring down the whites a little, we can then bring the highlights back up a little bit. And I like that right there, much more so as a starting point. But this scene, it lacks color. So we need to add some color here. But just to show you what this looks like before and after, toggle that off. That was before, that's after. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to creative and I'm going to add some vibrance here. So we're going to drag this vibrance and I'm going to go up to about 60 for this particular scene. I think 60 is a good bit of vibrance there. So we'll go over here. And yeah, 60 adds definitely some color back to the scene. And by the way, this scene, if we wanted to add some vibrance here, we've definitely got room. None of these colors are oversaturated, including here. If any of your colors get saturated here, they're going to go outside of this line if they're oversaturated, this inner shape here. So you don't want to ever go outside of that. But we can definitely add vibrance here if I drag this up. But I'm going to go to about right here for this scene, around 40. And it just depends on the mood and tone of whatever you're filming. So you've definitely got a lot of options there to work with S-LOG3. But then I wanted to show you something else. So this scene right here is from a totally different hike, and I filmed this with a shutter speed of 1/200. So first of all, let's grade this, and then I'm going to drop Gyroflow on here to show you the difference this makes. So for this one, I definitely overexposed it by about 1.7. So I'm going to put my -1.7 adjustment on there. And you can see that looks pretty good right there. But we definitely have some room to bring up the highlights now. So if I go back here, I'm going to bring up the highlights quite a bit here to brighten this scene. And the shadows we can also bring up. Shadows are pretty low there. So I'm going to bring those up just a little bit. We can get nice clean shadows because it was overexposed. So I'm just going to toggle through this, make sure everything looks good there. It does. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to add some vibrance here. The scene needs some more color. It was during early springtime of year, so there wasn't a lot of foliage or anything yet. So I'm going to bring that up to about right there. Scroll through this here. That looks good. So let's drop Gyroflow on it now and see how it looks, because there is a lot of movement in that. So there's Gyroflow, and let's play it. So yeah, no jitter, no ghosting right there. And I had my camera swinging around a lot. And I'm about to pan behind me. And yeah, no jitter or ghosting there that I can see either. Looks really good. Nice and smooth. And let me just toggle off Gyroflow so you can see the incredible job that this does. So when I toggle it off, really shaky footage. Let's go back here and toggle it on again. Nice smooth handheld footage, but it's still got some movement in it, which is good. Gives it that natural vlogging feel. The final scene I want to show you is one that I filmed with that ISO of 12,800. As I mentioned, the Sony ZV-E1 has dual native ISOs, so it has ISO 640 and it has ISO 12,800. 12,800 is incredible. This is before that's graded and before Gyroflow, but this is in a tunnel that to the human eye is basically almost completely dark. So it is incredible really in two regards. One, in this tunnel, in 12,800, there's like very little shadow noise, which is incredible at that high of an ISO. And two, the level of detail it captured in there, incredible. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply the default conversion from Sony, because even though this was 12,800, this wasn't exactly overexposed inside the tunnel. It was the only place that's going to be a little bit blown out is, of course, at the end of the tunnel, because it's normal daylight out there. That is a sacrifice for this scene. But yeah, we have nice clean shadows. So if we want to bring out more detail in here, we can actually do that. And then in this case, I can actually bring down the highlights. And if you look, when I bring those down, way down, you can actually see detail at the end of the tunnel. So S-LOG3 has so much dynamic range that we actually did not lose all the detail there. If I go ahead, there's actually still some detail to work with. And if we bring down the whites, it's going to help a little bit too. But we don't want to bring those down too much because it's going to give kind of an unnatural feel to that tunnel. But now that we brought up the shadows that much in here, we can actually bring them up even further if we want to for our scene. Really depends on the look you're going for. I'm just trying to show you the dynamic range here. And then the blacks, we can bring those down a little bit if we want to add some of that contrast back. So I'm going to put them right about there. And that looks really good. Amazing what ISO 12800 can do. But I'm also going to add some vibrance to this scene. We need some of that. So I'm going to go to about right there. And now I'm going to apply Gyroflow. So let's drop Gyroflow on here, get it all stabilized, and there we go. Look at that. Absolutely incredible. And now that we've got our clips graded and stabilized, I just want to show you my recommended export settings, because when you're filming an incredible vlog with the ZV-E1 and you've got that excellent footage, you want to make sure you export it so that you actually have it still look good when you upload it to share it later on. I'm going to go to Export Media. And what you want to do is you want to first select Match Source Adaptive High Bitrate. It's going to be our starting point. And then under Video, you want to select Match Source. And then you want to go to More and select Render at Maximum Depth and use Maximum Render Quality. And then down here under Profile, you want to uncheck the box and you want to select High. And under Level, you want to uncheck the box and select 5.2. And then further down here for the bitrate setting, you want to select CBR. CBR stands for constant bitrate. And then for this, the target bitrate you want to aim for with this footage is 100. 100 is going to give you large file sizes. So if you don't want it quite that big, you can back off a little bit and go to 65. It's also going to give you good looking footage. There could be some compression artifacts on YouTube and social media, but those should be minimal. But I recommend 100 if space is not an issue. It's going to look really good when you share it later on. And then those are the only settings you need to change. At that point, you can select export and your project is going to export. And if there's something more that you'd like to learn about the Sony ZV-E1, let me know in the comments below. Like I said, I've used this camera for a long time and I would love to show you other things you can do with this as well.